Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review of the first episode of Loki, Glorious Purpose on Disney Plus. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this episode. Now, granted, this isn't the most action-packed episode, and it is very exposition heavy because it's definitely laying out what the Time Variance Authority is, the TVA, what is going on with timelines and everything going on with the multiverse, what we can kind of expect with like Loki's mind space. Now, granted, we have delved into Loki's character previously, but this really kind of bores down into it, and the overall arching conflict that we are going to be getting out of this series, and potentially, depending upon how that conflict is resolved, leading into more kind of stuff with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And granted, I like this because of the world building that it does and how we kind of look into Loki's kind of character and what's kind of going on with it. And it's very, it's not slow. I mean, it's 52 minutes, and there's a good amount of like back and forth between kind of seriousness, kind of showing us what's kind of going on, and levity and everything going on. But this isn't a thing where a lot of explosions and a lot of badass shit goes on. This is very much a slow-paced episode that gets us into what the fuck we're pretty much kind of going to be doing here. So the beginning of the episode is pretty much starts us off at the end game scenario where our 2012 Loki gets a hold of the Tesseract, and then we kind of go off from there. So what happened after he got the Tesseract is he pretty much was teleported to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, falls out of the sky, and is like, what the fuck's going on? And he's pretty much trying to do his whole Loki bit of like, kneel before me, I am Loki of Asgard, blah, 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 blah. But that fits with what we had from 2012 Loki. And of course, the people of the Gobi Desert are like, the fuck's up with this dude? What the hell? And then out of nowhere, we see this kind of strange looking doorway appear, and people come out and are like, alright, we got the variant, let's fucking clean this shit up. And Loki's like, goes to like the desert people are like, hold that thought, and goes off to figure out what's going on with them. And like, alright, we got the variant, let's do this. It's like, you guys got nothing on me. And then he kind of gets time tased, if I want to be talking about it like that, because she's got like this baton thing, and she pretty much jabs his ass with it, and he's like moving at 1/16 speed, and she like smacks his ass, and he's like, oh, and she's like, yeah, you're moving at like 1/16 of speed, but you're feeling all that in real time. And then he kind of like falls down. They got like this kind of like collar thing on him. They set this kind of reset charge thing. He's like, all right, we're good. Let's reset this shit and get on going. And I was like, what the fuck? So evidently this would be like a branching timeline or something like that. Bring him in. We see the Time Variance Authority. We start to kind of like begin to understand what this strange kind of weird timeline police force kind of thing is. And we see that there is a variant scroll there, and was dealing with some interesting stuff. There's one dude who is like railing about how he's like connected to a Goldman Sachs executive's his father or whatnot, and that it's like, okay, so evidently variant kind of shit can like happen. This is kind of interesting. What the fuck's going on? And there's this dude pretty much sitting at the desk and like, oh, okay, what's going on here? It's like, here's this. Ooh, okay, what's this? Look, he's like, that's a tax charge. He's like, all right, fine, whatever. I don't know what the fuck this blue box ass thing is. And then the one kind of main woman that we see as like one of the hunters for the Time Variance Authority puts him in this room. This thing's like, hold still, please. It's like, what the fuck? His clothes get burned off. He gets like shot down through this thing where he gets put into this jumpsuit kind of thing. And this dude's like, hey, is this, sign this, and this is pretty much saying this is everything you ever said. He's like, what? And then of course, doing that, he talks for a little bit of the thing, signs it, and then gets like shacked down again. And the dude's like, okay, are you a robot or anything? He's like, not, oh my god, Loki of Asgard. It's like, oh, okay, just walk through the thing. Then he's like, but what would happen if I was a robot? You'd be burned, you'd be melted from the inside out. It's like, there's a lot of people that become like don't know that they're robots going through that, but that is a big thing that happens in Marvel comic books, and it is kind of funny that they use it as a joke here. It's like, just go through, just fucking go through, and goes through. He's now put into this other room where we see this other dude. This guy's telling him to take his ticket, and he's like, "Fuck you! I don't want to take my ticket." But Loki's like, "I'll take my ticket," and then they have to go through these lines. But then we are introduced to, like, granted, it's an info dump, exposition dump kind of thing, but it's done in a kind of fun and informative manner, kind of like in a 70s styles, kind of like weird commercial thing, where it explains what the Time Variance Authority is and kind of what their whole deal is. So, evidently, in the beginning, there were a lot of multiversal timelines. However, this then started leading to the effect that there was a multiversal war that would happen between all the different and varying timelines and dimensions. Makes sense. Now, this is important because this leans into like a 2015 storyline of like a secret war thing. Now, granted, there was also the 80s one, secret kind of secret wars kind of stuff, but this newer one dealt with incursions that each kind of like multiversal kind of realm would kind of incur upon the other, and then of course this would mainly happen between two ones, and then one would win out and knock out the other. That led to some weird fucking crazy ass shit that would be going on in those comics around those times. So that's why it's like, oh shit, that does sound like a problem. Of course, since everything's going crazy and everybody's kind of fighting, the timekeepers then pop up into existence to create what is called the sacred timeline. Why is this important? Well, this starts to bring into effect what is going on with timeline and time travel. And you'd be like, oh shit, okay, so there's a sacred timeline. What does that mean? Well, that means that if things are starting to branch off or people are trying to do other kind of things, that's kind of a no-no thing. And it kind of leads to this interesting kind of examination that hopefully this series does between free will and fate. Like, are we able to choose what we're able to do in our lives or not? Are we on these set paths? Because with the timekeepers creating this sacred kind of timeline and that they are protecting to a gigantic degree, that means that you have to do certain things their way. Otherwise, as we see within this little film that's going on, they will come and they will fucking erase you from existence and erase the timeline that you're doing. And that explains what those hunters were kind of doing when Loki was fucking going off the script in Endgame. It's like, oh shit. And this is kind of big because, interestingly enough, as we go through on this episode, Loki in 2012 thought that freedom was an illusion and that everybody else except for him deserve the right to kind of like plot that shit out for people. And it's funny because as we're going through this episode, he then sees this other organization doing that shit to him, and it fucking makes him angry and confused and kind of starting to kind of examine that kind of stuff. And it's like, do I really choose what I choose? Kind of thing. It's like, ooh, okay. So he's freaked out about that. It's like, oh, if you go off and do that shit, you're brought here and you're tried with all this kind of stuff, or you're fucking erased from existence. And that timeline that you're doing kind of fucked up shit would get erased from existence too. Now, granted, this does pose the problem that, like, oh, Cap doing whatever he didn't do a branch timeline. Otherwise, the Time Variance Authority would have fucking nuked his ass. Unless, as a consequence of what was going on and what was determined by the timekeepers, these three kind of floaty ass dudes doing whatever they do, he's like part of the Time Variance Authority or whatnot. That's a possibility. I don't know if that's what we're kind of going to be getting into. So he sees the consequences of not having your ticket as, fuck your ticket, dude, got fucking erased from existence. He's like, I got my ticket. And he, of course, is brought forth to this pretty much like Time Variance judge person. She's like, are you guilty or not guilty? He, of course, brings up the Avengers doing their timey-wimey bullshit, and they're like, no, they were supposed to do that. It's like, huh, that's interesting. The Time Variance Authority, you would think, would be like, no, you can't really do shit with time travel because the fuck up flows and shit like that and create multiversal wars and all that. But yet, at this point, with this kind of thing that the Avengers were doing, they were allowed to do it because that was part of the sacred timeline. So, that's kind of interesting. And granted, it could also be the plot demanded that they had to do it that way, and you can do that, but I think it's kind of interesting that they're at least attempting to explain that, yeah, they were supposed to do that. So, he was trying to do that, but then he's like, all right, yeah, I'm guilty of all these other things, but not of whatever you're saying. Is like, um, we can just fucking erase you. It's like, all right, fine, yeah. But we see this other dude, Mobius, pop up, who's of the Time Variance Authority as well. Now, before we really gotten into seeing him here, he had been working a case in, let us see, 1549 France, where evidently somebody who is very particular with knives is able to take out this hunter group that was sent by the Time Variance Authority, and that their reset charge was taken. And they're trying to figure out what this person's goals and motives are. And it's, of course, in a church. They also see this little girl pop up, and, of course, Mobius is trying to get some info from her. And he's like, hey, did you see who did this? And she points towards this devil painting. Now, the thing is, it also has horns. And at first you're like, oh, they could be doing something of like linking this to Mephisto, the MCU's version of the devil. But it could also be linking to Loki because he usually likes to have horns and stuff like that. But because of what we've seen, and evidently she's like got like blue teeth and everything, and he's like, oh, what's with your teeth? It's like, oh, whoever was here gave her this like kablooey blue gum kind of shit. It's like, what the fuck? It's like, all right, we just fix what we can. Take this back, analyze it, see what's going on. So again, he pops up and he starts talking to Loki and wants to get some more information with him. So he takes him to this place and they start kind of like conversing. He's like, hey, I think we can kind of figure out what's going on here. And we see this thing that Loki has around his neck. It's like a reset kind of thing. So if he tries to run away, if you've got the clicker, it pretty much puts him back to like a reset period. That's important because he does all these kind of like shenanigans and we get some kind of like things of like he like throws a chair, he tries to walk at a certain point and he like gets clicked back and everything. But Mobius is trying to get a feel for who Loki is, bringing up all the stuff that he's done and if he likes killing people and hurting people, and showing what was going on if he did all these other kinds of things. Like, yeah, if you had stuck to what was going on, you would have went back to Asgard, you would have talked with your mother, and you would have accidentally led to her death. He's like, what the fuck? And it's just kind of like messing with him. And what Mobius is trying to get at is pretty much who Loki is as a person. And this is important because we're trying to figure out what Mobius is trying to get at this. And we get that at the end of the episode. But we see him running through Loki's things, what his kind of mindset is. He's like, oh, okay, bringing up the whole stuff with what he's done in Avengers, bringing up why he does what he does. He's like, oh, what was your objective with her? Become the king of Midgard. All right, past that, Asgard, the Nine Realms, all of it. So, oh, you would have eventually, of course, betrayed Thanos anyway. But, of course, he doesn't know what kind of repercussions that would have. And he wants to know... of course, Loki brings up that the Time Variance Authority is just these weak people, like, doing this illusion of control on people to spread fear and consolidate their control, which is what Loki has pretty much been trying to do with what he was doing at when he first appeared in Avengers in the whole Germany scene, and what he does when he hurts and he kills people. Because that's what Mobius is trying to get into his core at, to try and figure out who Loki is as a person. However, he gets called away because of one of the hunters, but Loki is able to get his like kind of clicker thing and is trying to run through and get back to Tesseract. He is able to get to it, but he sees that in his trying to do that, he's trying to like threaten the kind of death dude. He's like, I'll cut you like a fish. He's like, what the fuck's a fish? And he's like, I'll kill you. I was like, alright, fine, just do what your shit needs to do. He's able to find the Infinity Stones. And the thing is, it's like, oh yeah, those don't work here. We just use them as paperweights. Now, I can understand where people will be like, this is kind of shit, trying to show that the Infinity Stones are kind of worthless and moving on from them like this. However, you do need to reevaluate how certain power structures work within a universe when you continue going forward in said universe. Power escalation problems are always a problem, and I think this was handled well enough to show how powerful the Timekeepers are, because in their realm and in their control of the sacred timeline, these Infinity Stones, which are pretty much all of them, and even the Tesseract, can't be used there at the Time Variance Authority. And finding out what's going on, with this is like, holy shit. Oh, also another kind of funny bit that we saw in that kind of like time theater place is that Loki was responsible for the whole DB Cooper dude flying out of the plane with the money. He had lost a bet to Thor, and that's what his repercussions were, and that Heimdall and them kind of sucked him in. So that's what that funny little thing was about. Side note for that, but that was a funny little tidbit that they had. But seeing that these Infinity Stones can be pretty much deemed powerless, these physical manifestations of fundamental forces of the universe, truly shows how much of a power the Timekeepers and the Time Variance Authority are. That is a good way to set them up as, well, some kind of entity that has to be dealt with. We don't know if they are an antagonistic one or what would be going on, but that's like, ooh, shit. If you can't use the Infinity Stones against these motherfuckers, you're going to have to think of some other shit. Which is an important thing, because if you'd be thrown up against them, you'd be like, hey, why don't we use the Infinity Stones? Doesn't work on it. We got to work on another kind of plan for that. It's like, oh shit, that's kind of big. That puts them on par. Well, that puts them above the Infinity Stones if they can pretty much deem if they're usable or not usable. So we then pretty much get the little bit of the one lady hunter that's been like going around trying to get Loki. He's able to pretty much get her in a compromised position and pretty much get the clicker on her, and he like fucks with her and all that. But Loki is pretty much sitting in the time theater afterwards with the Tesseract, and Mobius comes and is like, hey, you find out that doesn't work, huh? He's like, yeah. And he really gets started, and then he's like, he did the hurting and the killing because that did the illusion for the fear. So that way he could do other stuff. He doesn't like doing it. And that was an important bit. And he's like, alright, maybe you can help us with some kind of stuff that we're going on with. Loki, of course, wants to burn this kind of place down. He's like, hey, there are certain places that I'd help you burn down, this nightmare kind of place. Now, that's a fun little nod saying about Nightmare, because there is an entity named Nightmare that Doctor Strange fights a lot. So, I don't think that's anything much more than like if you were just reading and you're like, that's kind of a funny thing. And Loki kind of sees more of the Time Variance Authority and seeing how technologically advanced. He's thinking it's magic, and he's like, no, it's not magic, as Mobius tells him. But he's got an important thing that he needs to deal with, that there's this rogue variant going around killing hunter squads and taking reset charges, and he kind of needs Loki's help for it. And he's like, why is that? Because it's a fugitive variant of Loki, and that kind of explains why Mobius was so fascinated and so intent on learning who Loki is as a person, because he's trying to get into the mind of this variant. Granted, normally he probably would have been like, hey, I'm not going to get that much into this kind of case, but hey, here's a variant, we can figure out what's going on here. And he seems kind of amicable to kind of dealing with kind of stuff, because we'd seen him look through the rest of his history, seen his mother die, seen his father die, seen what happened with him and Thor, seen him die at Thanos' hands, and he's like, am I just a puppet? And it's really kind of interesting to see Loki kind of grapple with that. And Tom Hiddleston does a really good job of acting as Loki, and specifically this kind of 2012 Loki. It's really kind of, I understand that you could be like, when you're getting into playing with like multiversal kind of characters and putting them in different time periods, you have to watch out, because you don't want to kind of retread the kind of character growth that you've already got, because this is a different kind of path and will result in different kind of things. And we had such a kind of really good character growth moments that we'd seen with Loki throughout the main MCU. Now, granted, this is still the MCU, but in his main kind of trajectory and the main kind of story that we're seeing on this sacred timeline. But we see that there's more going on with this fugitive Loki, and the thing is, there's quite a different kind of possibilities that we can see, because the episode ends pretty much seen in 1858 Oklahoma as the Time Hunters, Time Variance Authority hunters were pretty much drawn in by a kind of like somebody was like using time stuff, probably trying to dig up and find oil, which is what they thought. But then they are taken out and killed by this rogue Loki variant. Now, there's a couple ways that this could potentially get thrown about, and this could actually be the same Loki that we're following, that at some point he learned about, like in this one, he learned about the Time Variance Authority, sees all this stuff going on, and then goes rogue, and this is his eventual future. This could be, of course, be another Loki doing all these kind of different things, and that's important. They didn't show the face. This could be the female version of Loki, potentially, which kind of works. Loki has been known to kind of like shape change and everything like that, and gods, of course, within their pantheons can rotate and change that kind of stuff willy-nilly, pretty much. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that that could be kind of one of the things that happens. Hell, in the comics, when the gods were reborn, Loki like stole Sif's body and was walking around in that kind of shit. Now, that's pretty much setting up what our main conflict is, the kind of power of the Time Variance Authority and the Timekeepers. And we also get other stuff brought in, like Nexus. We'd seen that also brought up in Wanda and WandaVision, where Wanda would be referred to as a Nexus being. And that's kind of important because of all the different kind of like possibilities and stuff that could like roll out of that. Same with like a Nexus event that we see referenced in this show, where different kind of like timelines can blow out. And we also see an interesting thing where one of the hunters is talking about how this line has almost hit the red line, which I guess would be probably like the outer bounds of what is potentially acceptable within the sacred timeline. We're not quite sure. It's just said that that's kind of one of the rules that they had to get out of there before it hit the red line. So hopefully there's at some point where a branched off universe does hit the red line to kind of give us more of an idea of what that means and why that's kind of important. But we've ended off with pretty much a good understanding of the Time Variance Authority, this Loki and his kind of realm and thinking of what's kind of going on here. We've got the setup of the conflict. We don't know that much about Mobius, played by Owen Wilson, but I really like his character and how he like interacts with Loki, how he just kind of exists in the universe. And there was also a part where they brought up Phil Coulson and they didn't reference Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or anything like that. I'm like, yeah, they're pretty much just putting that in the do not disturb box in the back, kind of. It seems like they're going, oh, that kind of shit is like Star Wars Legacy kind of shit. You know what I mean? Didn't happen, non-canon, almost shit. Now, granted, I know there's confusion on that and stuff going on with what Kevin Feige has said about it, but from what they were happening on towards the end of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and going as wacky as they did. I use wacky of like how they just kind of went without it, whatever they wanted to do. I understand the confusion. It's like, what the fuck? So, I definitely enjoyed this. I think that this had a very strong first episode, kind of similar to Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Not as much... it's definitely a better strong start than like WandaVision in my opinion. Now, with how Falcon and the Winter Soldier went, even though I enjoyed that, it did kind of go way nuttier as it went on until it got to its end that I liked. So we'll kind of have to see how this goes, because I started off being like, oh, that's pretty good, and then it kind of walked at it like just went, ooh. I'm like, all right, what's going on here? What? Oh, please don't do that. So hopefully this sticks to more of this kind of consistency. Granted, not as much of like the exposition dump, but this, in certain cases, when you're doing a first episode for something, you are going to have to exposition dump to do enough world building for people to understand what's going on. It's how effectively it's executed that needs to work on, and like this is the thing you need to watch out for. And I think they executed this pretty well enough to where it's not like you got bored. You're like, okay, I'm entertained seeing it this way and understanding it this way, because they did a good portion of telling and they did a good portion of showing of like, oh, okay, here's this thing that explains the whole sacred timeline. Here's these people actually going through that process of protecting the sacred timeline and everything going along with it, and actually showing you what kind of goes on with it. That's how you kind of want to do it. Do that kind of balance. So I would definitely recommend seeing this if you got the chance. all the acting worked very well in it, especially the two main leads of like Loki and Mobius, and I can't kind of wait to see how their kind of buddy cop kind of pairing works out and what the conflict actually kind of gets to, because it seems like if Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is where we're going to end up, the Sacred Timeline is going to get real funky. So those are my opinions on the episode. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.